Training Bay 7 had seen its share of altercations, but this was different. The automated cleaning drones had retreated to their wall alcoves 3 minutes ago. An algorithmic decision that suggested either an equipment malfunction or something the machines couldn't quite categorize. Given what was about to unfold, the latter proved disturbingly accurate. You know what your problem is, Dust? The lead Harvakian stretched to his full 3-meter height, mandibles clicking with anticipation. His chitinous armor gleamed under the bay's harsh lights, 6 arms flexing in a display meant to intimidate. You think being from a Deathworld makes you special? Cadet Dust, a designation that had stuck since orientation when someone noticed humans named themselves after atmospheric particles, remained motionless near the gravity simulators. 5'8", maybe 160 soaking wet, wearing standard-issue Academy grays that somehow managed to look rumpled despite being synthetic fiber. The human watched the 7-member coalition arrange themselves with the detached interest of someone observing weather patterns. Special? Dust's voice carried the particular flatness that came from processing multiple threat assessments simultaneously. That's your takeaway from xenobiology class? The Zephyrian twins flanked left and right, their crystalline bodies refracting the bay's lighting into prismatic warnings. They moved with the synchronized grace of beings who had never known individual thought, never experienced the lonely terror of making decisions without collective consciousness. Pretty to watch, really, like watching art prepare to commit suicide. 7 against 1, observed the lone Mallory, whose song speech translated into standard as musical mockery. Its gas giant physiology meant it couldn't participate directly, but it could certainly commentate. How wonderfully sporting of you. Shut it, wind chime, snapped the Harvakian. This isn't about numbers, it's about putting Earth trash in its place. The remaining 4, 2 more Zephyrians, a Karathi, and something that might have been from the Theta Quadrant but could equally have been a sentient houseplant, formed the outer ring. Standard pack tactics, if you ignored the fact that none of their species had evolved as pack hunters. They were mimicking behaviors they'd seen in holovids, playing at being dangerous while fundamentally misunderstanding what danger actually looked like. Dust shifted weight from one foot to the other. A tiny movement, barely perceptible, but it caused every threat assessment algorithm in the bay's monitoring system to recalibrate. The medical drones hadn't moved from their charging stations yet, but their standby lights had shifted from green to amber. Machines, unlike the 7 aliens closing in, recognized predatory preparation when they saw it. Here's what's going to happen, the human said, tone remaining conversational. You're going to rush me, I'm going, to defend myself. Then you're going to spend the next 6 months learning to eat through tubes while your various biological systems remember how to function. Arrogant little... The lead Zephyrian never finished the thought. The Harvakian gave the signal, a mandible click that meant now in his species threat display vocabulary. 7 bodies moved with coordinated precision, a symphony of alien physiologies converging on one unremarkable human who had somehow attracted their combined ire. 9 seconds later, the medical emergency klaxons began their automated wailing. It wasn't combat, not in any sense the Academy's training protocols would recognize. Combat implied some form of back and forth, a contest between opponents of roughly equal capability. This was closer to what happened when a maintenance drone encountered a navigation error and began systematically dismantling whatever happened to be in its path. The lead Harvakian reached Dust first, 6 arms extended in a grappling maneuver that would have worked beautifully against another Harvakian, or really any species that fought with the assumption that overwhelming size and strength were sufficient. Dust stepped inside the creature's reach, did something with an elbow that produced a sound like snapping ceramics, and the 3-meter tall alien folded into a twitching heap, that would have been impressive origami if origami were supposed to scream. The Zephyrian twins arrived as a synchronized unit, which turned out to be tactically disadvantageous when Dust grabbed the first one's extended appendage and used it as a fulcrum to redirect the second twin's momentum into the nearest wall. The sound was like wind chimes falling down a mountain. Beautiful in its way. The remaining four showed admirable commitment to their obviously doomed plan. They kept coming even as their compatriots painted abstract art with various bodily fluids across the bay's polished surfaces. The Karathi managed to land a blow that would have shattered ribs on any species evolved in a reasonable gravity well. Dust absorbed the impact, actually smiled, and responded with a series of precise strikes that left the alien questioning several fundamental assumptions about vertebrate structural integrity. By second 7, the automated medical systems had classified the situation as a mass casualty event. Emergency bulkheads began sealing as trauma drones descended from ceiling compartments like metallic angels of mercy, their onboard computers already calculating blood loss ratios and tissue damage patterns. Second 8 saw the last 2 attackers attempting to retreat, which was roughly 7 seconds too late to be tactically useful. Dust pursued with the methodical thoroughness of someone following a checklist, which, it turned out, was exactly what was happening. Second 9. Silence, save for the hum of medical equipment and the quiet whimpers of 7 beings discovering that evolutionary psychology was a harsh teacher. Dust stood in the center of the carnage, breathing steady, not even winded. The human pulled out a regulation tablet and began filling out an incident report with the bureaucratic precision of someone who had done this before. Medical emergency in Training Bay 7, the automated system announced to no one in particular. Multiple casualties requiring immediate intervention. All personnel maintain safe distance until clearance is given. The Mallory, forgotten in its observation alcove, watched trauma drones swarm over the 7 broken forms with something approaching awe. Its crystalline structure resonated with a frequency that translated roughly as wonder, if wonder could sound like a funeral dirge played on broken glass. "What are you?" it whispered, the question directed at the human who was now calmly describing the incident in report format, checking boxes for self-defense and proportional response with clinical detachment. Dust looked up from the tablet, considered the question with the same methodical approach that had just redefined 7 alien perspectives on human capabilities. "Tired," came the eventual answer. "I'm just really, really tired." The medical drones worked frantically to keep 7 hearts beating, 7 respiratory systems functioning, 7 nervous systems from shutting down entirely. Outside the sealed bay, Academy personnel gathered at observation windows, their various species expressions of shock creating a rainbow of existential crisis across the corridor. And in the center of it all, one human finished filing paperwork with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood that violence was just another form of communication. And sometimes the universe needed a very clear, very concise message about boundaries. The machines kept working. They were, after all, only following their programming, unlike everyone else in the room. The Kepler Military Academy's disciplinary tribunal convened exactly 47 hours after the incident, which was either impressive bureaucratic efficiency or evidence that someone very important was very concerned about 7 near corpses requiring life support. Given the Academy's usual pace, glacial would be generous. Commander Veleth suspected the latter. "State your designation for the record." The tribunal's lead arbiter, an Nexari whose species had perfected the art of looking perpetually disappointed, directed toward the figure seated at the respondent's table. "Cadet Dust, serial designation 7749-Earth-Primary." The human sat with parade ground posture, hands folded, expression suggesting mild interest in the proceedings rather than concern about potential expulsion or execution. Professor Kithrak, the Vorthak who supervised Training Bay 7, clicked his way to the witness platform on 4 articulated legs. His compound eyes reflected the tribunal's harsh lighting in patterns that suggested either deep contemplation or the beginning stages of a migraine. "Professor, you were present during the incident?" "Present is generous." Kithrak's translated voice carried the dry precision of someone whose species communicated through pheromone gradients. "I was reviewing combat protocols in the adjacent monitoring station when my sensors detected what I initially classified as a minor training accident." Initially? The Bay's automated systems began requesting emergency medical authorization at 14:32:7. Full trauma protocols engaged by 14:32:16. In my 43 years of academy service, I have never witnessed a 9-second interval produce such comprehensive biological catastrophe. Arbitrix Velith's head crest fluttered with what passed for skepticism among her people. "You're suggesting Cadet Dust deliberately orchestrated this outcome?" "I'm suggesting," Kithrak replied, with the careful tone of someone who had spent 2 days reviewing security footage, that what occurred was less spontaneous altercation and more practical demonstration of applied physics. The tribunal's second arbiter, a creature whose species name was unpronounceable, but whose translation matrix rendered his designation as concerned, bureaucrat number 2, leaned forward. "Elaborate." The 7 assailants positioned themselves according to standard multi-vector engagement protocols. Textbook formation, actually. They moved with coordination that suggested advanced planning rather than spontaneous aggression. And the humans' response? Kithrak's mandibles performed what might have been the Vorthak equivalent of a shrug. Cadet Dust eliminated each threat using the minimum necessary force to achieve permanent incapacitation. Not maximum force. Minimum. The difference is mathematically significant. A holographic display materialized above the tribunal platform, showing Training Bay 7 from multiple angles. The timestamp read 14:32:7. "Play segment 4 Alpha," Velith commanded. The display showed the final moments of the engagement. Dust's movements were precise, economical, almost choreographed. Each strike landed with surgical accuracy on specific anatomical weak points that would maximize damage while minimizing lethality. Pause. The recording froze as Dust redirected the final Zephyrian's momentum into the wall. "Professor, in your expert opinion, how does one acquire this level of anatomical knowledge?" "Extensive study of xenobiology, combined with practical application of biomechanical principles." Kithrak paused, compound eyes reflecting the hologram. "Or growing up on a planet where everything is constantly trying to kill you and developing instinctive threat assessment as a survival mechanism. Is there a distinction?" "Not functionally, no." The next witness was Cadet Shimmer of Distant Stars, one of the Malori who had observed the incident. Its gaseous form rippled with harmonics that the translation matrix rendered as barely controlled anxiety. "The music was wrong," it sang, its voice a symphony of wind instruments playing a funeral dirge. "Violence should crescendo and diminish, ebb and flow like proper composition. This was percussion, single notes, perfectly timed, ending in silence." "Explain what you witnessed, Cadet." "The 7 moved like an orchestra preparing to play, coordinated, rehearsed, confident in their ability to create beautiful chaos. But the human..." Another harmonic shift, this one suggesting metaphysical confusion. "The human was not playing music. The human was tuning instruments." "Tuning?" "Making adjustments, corrections, small, precise modifications to ensure proper operation." Shimmer of Distant Stars pulsed with colors that translated as uncomfortable realization. We thought we were watching a fight. We were actually watching maintenance. The tribunal spent the next hour reviewing depositions from medical staff, security personnel, and the Academy's automated monitoring systems. Each perspective painted the same picture. 7 beings had attempted to initiate combat with 1 being who had responded with clinical efficiency. Then came the revelation that shifted the entire proceeding. Cadet Dust, Arbitrix Velith addressed the human directly for the first time. Our investigation has uncovered communications between the 7 assailants spanning the previous 3 weeks. Messages discussing putting the Deathworlder in its place and proving humans don't belong here. Were you aware of this conspiracy? Dust considered the question with the same methodical approach that had characterized everything else about their behavior. Yes. The tribunal chamber fell silent, save for the ambient hum of life support systems. You knew they were planning to attack you? I knew they were planning something. The Harvakian had been asking detailed questions about human anatomy during xenobiology seminars. The Zephyrians kept timing their training sessions to coincide with mine. Basic pattern recognition. And you chose not to report this? I chose to wait and see what form their stupidity would take. Dust's expression remained neutral. I was curious whether they would actually follow through, or if they possessed enough intelligence to recognize the fundamental flaw in their plan. Which was, they were testing whether humans belonged in a military academy by attacking a human in a controlled environment with full medical support and automated monitoring. The human's tone carried the patience of someone explaining basic mathematics to children. If they had succeeded in seriously injuring me, they would have proven that humans were unsuitable for military service. If I defended myself effectively, they would have their answer about why humans were recruited in the first place. Concerned bureaucrat number 2 rustled his appendages in what passed for confusion among his species. So you allowed yourself to be attacked? I allowed them to make a choice, Dust corrected. They chose poorly. The push implications settled over the tribunal like toxic gas. The 7 assailants hadn't been bullies expressing xenophobic sentiment. They had been conducting an unauthorized and spectacularly misguided scientific experiment, with themselves as test subjects. The irony, Professor Kithrak observed with the clinical detachment of his species, is that they succeeded in proving their hypothesis. They simply failed to survive long enough to appreciate the results. Commander Velith's head crest flattened against her skull, a gesture that indicated either deep thought or the beginning stages of a nervous breakdown. This tribunal is adjourned pending further review, she announced. Cadet Dust, you are confined to quarters until we determine how to classify this incident. As the chamber emptied, Dust remained seated, apparently unbothered by the prospect of disciplinary action. The human pulled out the same regulation tablet from 2 days ago and began working on what appeared to be routine homework assignments. Outside the chamber, Professor Kithrak paused to observe the human through the transparent aluminum barrier. Fascinating, he murmured to himself. They really have no idea what they're dealing with. Whether they referred to the tribunal, the academy, or the galaxy at large remained an open question. 6 months earlier, in the pristine conference chamber of the Galactic Defense Consortium headquarters, a very different kind of problem was being discussed by beings who had never personally experienced the concept of existential dread. Fleet Admiral Zexithara of the Altarian hegemony gazed across the polished crystalline table at his assembled colleagues with something approaching desperation. His species had evolved from creatures that resembled ornamental houseplants, and his current expression suggested someone was threatening to forget to water him. Gentle beings, we have a war we cannot win. The statement hung in the recycled atmosphere like a particularly unpleasant smell. Around the table, Representatives from 47 different species processed this information according to their various cognitive frameworks and reached the same uncomfortable conclusion. They were comprehensively screwed. The Devourers have consumed 17 systems in the past solar cycle, continued General Kyrith of the Hegemonic Defense Corps, her crystalline body refracting the chamber's mood lighting into patterns that suggested impending doom. Our projections indicate complete galactic consumption within 43 standard years. Surely our combined fleets, began someone from the back of the room. Our combined fleets, interrupted Admiral Zexathera, are operated by beings whose homeworlds are paradise gardens where the most dangerous predator is whatever eats decorative flowers. We have created the most sophisticated military technology in galactic history and staffed it with personnel whose greatest childhood trauma was learning that some fruits have seeds. The uncomfortable truth rippled through the chamber like a shockwave. The Galactic Defense Consortium represented the pinnacle of civilized achievement. Thousands of species living in harmony, sharing knowledge, exploring the cosmos with academic curiosity rather than territorial ambition. It was, by any reasonable measure, the greatest success story in the known universe. It was also, as current circumstances were demonstrating, catastrophically unsuited for actual warfare. Our soldiers are excellent at following protocols, Admiral Zexthara continued, with the tone of someone describing a beloved pet's tragic character flaws. They excel at equipment maintenance, strategic planning, and diplomatic resolution of conflicts. When faced with an enemy that follows no protocols, maintains no equipment, and considers diplomacy a form of seasoning, they tend to underperform. Defense Minister Korth, whose species had achieved enlightenment through centuries of philosophical contemplation, raised what might charitably be called a hand. What specific performance metrics are we discussing? Our casualty rates suggest that our military personnel treat combat like a sporting event with rules, referees, and the possibility of appealing unfavorable decisions to a higher authority. The Admiral's plant-like features managed to convey profound exasperation. The Devourers treat combat like dinner preparation. The chamber's environmental systems had begun cycling through calming aromatics, an automatic response to the collective stress levels being detected. Unfortunately, several species present found the scent of synthetic lavender existentially threatening, which rather illustrated the problem they were facing. "We need warriors," declared General Kirith, with the air of someone stating an obvious solution. Beings with actual survival instincts, species that understand violence as something other than an academic exercise. "Where exactly do you propose we find such beings?" asked Defense Minister Korth. "Our civilization has spent millennia eliminating the conditions that produce what you describe. Peace, prosperity, and rational discourse tend to discourage the development of homicidal expertise. This was when Captain Mechstar of the Survey Corps cleared his throat with a sound like grinding metal. His species evolved from scavengers, which made him uniquely qualified to recognize opportunities that others might overlook. Actually, we may have recently cataloged a species that meets these criteria." The holographic display above the conference table materialized into a three-dimensional representation of a blue-green world orbiting a remarkably average yellow star. Designation: Sol 3. Local name: Earth. Inhabited by a species that calls itself human. Initial contact protocols were postponed due to their ongoing tendency toward self-destruction. "Explain," Admiral Zexthera commanded. "They are currently engaged in what they call world wars. Planet-wide conflicts involving hundreds of millions of individuals using increasingly sophisticated methods of killing each other. Our xenosociology team classified them as promising but premature for diplomatic contact." General Kyrith's crystalline structure pulsed with interest. "How premature?" "They have recently developed atomic weapons and immediately used them on each other, twice, as a demonstration of resolve rather than military necessity. The chamber fell silent as this information percolated through various cognitive processes. Several species present had never encountered the concept of using ultimate weapons for psychological warfare rather than strategic objectives. Their homeworld, Captain Mechstar continued, consulting his survey data, is classified as a Class 12 Deathworld. Gravity is 30% above galactic standard. Atmospheric composition includes toxins that would be lethal to 67% of known species. Weather patterns regularly produce environmental catastrophes that would qualify as planetary emergencies on most civilized worlds. And the inhabitants? They consider these conditions normal. Many engage in recreational activities that deliberately expose them to additional dangers for the purpose of enjoyment. Defense Minister Korth made a sound that his translation matrix rendered as profound confusion. They seek out additional mortality risks as entertainment. They jump out of functional aircraft for fun. They climb mountains that serve no strategic purpose. They deliberately enter bodies of water containing predatory creatures, apparently to swim with them. Captain Mechstar paused, checking his data twice to ensure accuracy. Our behavioral assessment team concluded that they have weaponized their own survival instincts. Admiral Zexathera leaned forward, his plant-like features arranging themselves into something resembling hope. Are they technologically capable of space travel? Primitive but functional, they have achieved orbital insertion and lunar surface operations using what our engineers describe as controlled explosions and mathematical optimism. Military capabilities? They have been continuously at war with each other for their entire recorded history. Current global military expenditures represent approximately 2% of their total economic output, which they consider peacetime levels. The implications were staggering. A species that considered current Earth-level military spending as a minimal peacetime requirement was either completely insane or possessed survival instincts that bordered on the supernatural. "Recommendation?" asked General Kirith. Captain Mechstar's expression, insofar as his species could manage expressions, suggested someone presenting a solution that was either brilliant or catastrophically stupid, with no middle ground available. We invite them to join the consortium. Specifically, we offer them places in our military academy system. We study how they think about warfare, and they help us remember what it means to fight for survival rather than sporting excellence. And if they prove too violent for integration? Then we have learned something valuable about the nature of warfare from a species that has been practicing it for millennia, the captain replied. And if they prove adaptable, we have recruited beings who understand that sometimes violence is not a regrettable necessity, but an art form requiring practice, dedication, and a complete absence of fairness. The vote was unanimous, though several representatives required additional oxygen supplementation afterward. 3 days later, the first diplomatic transmission was sent to Earth, offering humanity a place among the stars and, more specifically, enrollment opportunities at the finest military academies in the galaxy. The humans, characteristically, responded by asking for detailed specifications on the physical fitness requirements and whether they could bring their own weapons, which should have been the first indication that everyone involved had fundamentally misunderstood who was studying whom. The tribunal's verdict arrived with all the bureaucratic fanfare of a maintenance notification. Cadet Dust was hereby promoted to senior cadet status and assigned to the newly created Department of Applied Combat Psychology. The 7 former assailants were transferred to Cultural Sensitivity and Xenological Understanding seminars, where they would spend the next semester learning why attacking Deathworlders was generally contraindicated for continued biological function. This announcement was delivered by Commander Veleth with the expression of someone who had spent the past week discovering that her understanding of military hierarchy was fundamentally inadequate for current circumstances. The Academy, she explained to the assembled staff, has decided to treat this incident as an unscheduled but highly educational demonstration of interspecies combat dynamics. Professor Kithrak, observing from the faculty section, made the Vorthak equivalent of a snort. Educational. Yes, I suppose that's one way to describe watching 7 beings simultaneously discover the limitations of their evolved conflict resolution strategies. 3 days after the verdict, an unusual delegation approached Dust in the Academy's hydroponics garden, one of the few places where humans could find vegetation that reminded them of home, assuming home was a carefully controlled environment where nothing was actively trying to poison you. The delegation consisted of 6 beings, each moving with the careful precision of individuals who had recently relearned the fundamentals of locomotion. The 7th member was notably absent, still requiring assistance with basic motor functions after what the medical staff euphemistically called recalibration of nervous system responses. Senior Cadet, the lead Zephyrian, spoke with the crystalline harmonics that indicated either deep respect or profound terror. His speech patterns carried new rhythms, cadences altered by recent trauma. We request guidance. Dust looked up from the tomato plants with the mild interest of someone who had been expecting this conversation for approximately 72 hours. About what, specifically? How to fight like you do, said the Harvakian, whose mandibles still clicked with slight irregularity when forming certain consonants. How to think about combat the way your species thinks about it. The human set down the watering device with deliberate care, the same methodical approach that had characterized everything else about their behavior. You want me to teach you how to be violent? We want you to teach us how to survive violence, corrected one of the remaining Zephyrians. There is a difference, we have learned. Significant difference, agreed the Karathi, whose own speech patterns now carried undertones that suggested a fundamental reassessment of several core beliefs about the nature of conflict. This was, Dust reflected, probably inevitable. Species that had evolved in controlled environments, where conflict was philosophical rather than physical, would naturally seek to understand how beings from less accommodating worlds had developed their particular approaches to problem-solving. What makes you think I can teach you anything useful? The human asked. Because, the lead Zephyrian replied with crystalline precision, our research into human military structure indicates that you are considered unsuitable for actual combat deployment. The silence that followed was filled only by the gentle hum of hydroponic systems and the distant sound of someone's worldview undergoing structural revision. Explain. The Harvakian consulted a data tablet with the careful attention of someone who had recently learned that assumptions could be physically hazardous. Earth's military designation for Academy exchange cadets, diplomatic personnel, non-combat roles only. Translation: beings too gentle for frontline service but suitable for cultural exchange programs. Dust's expression remained neutral, but something in the human's posture suggested amusement. And you concluded what from this information? That if you represent the peaceful end of human military capability, the Karathi said with the slow horror of someone working through the mathematical implications, then we have no conceptual framework for understanding what your actual warriors are like. The human reached into a pocket and withdrew the same regulation tablet that had appeared throughout this entire sequence of events. A few quick inputs brought up what appeared to be a personnel file. Earthborn population, 8 billion. Military personnel, 12 million. Academy exchange candidates, 300. Selection criteria for exchange program. Dust paused, reading directly from the screen. Demonstrated ability to resolve conflicts through non-violent means. High scores on diplomatic temperament assessments. Documented history of de-escalation tactics in high-stress situations. The implications settled over the group like a toxic cloud. "You're telling us?" The lead Zephyrian's voice carried harmonics that suggested existential crisis. "That Earth deliberately sent their most peaceful individuals to represent human military capability? Earth sent the humans most likely to integrate successfully with alien cultures without causing diplomatic incidents," Dust corrected, "which is not the same thing as sending their most capable warriors." The Harvakian made a sound like grinding ceramics. "What would happen if they sent actual warriors?" "Wars would end faster," the human replied with clinical detachment, "but the diplomatic consequences would probably outweigh the military benefits. Hard to maintain trade relationships with species whose military personnel require therapy after observing human combat operations." What followed was the establishment of the Academy's first human combat psychology program, designed to help non-Deathworld species develop what the curriculum delicately termed survival-oriented cognitive frameworks. The program proved remarkably popular, though the dropout rate was approximately 60%, mostly due to what counselors described as conceptual adjustment disorders. The irony, which was not lost on the faculty, was that the program's most successful graduates were not learning to fight like humans. They were learning to think about fighting the way humans thought about everything else, as a problem requiring practical solutions rather than theoretical frameworks. Dust's teaching methodology focused primarily on meditation techniques designed to help alien minds overcome their instinctive fairness when faced with life-threatening situations. The curriculum included modules on abandoning sporting behavior during combat, why your enemy's well-being is not your responsibility, and applied paranoia for Paradise Worlders. The most popular course, according to enrollment statistics, was Learning to Turn Off Your Conscience, a practical guide for civilized species. 6 months later, Cadet Shimmer of Distant Stars observed another incident in Training Bay 7. This time, it was 3 human exchange cadets sparring with a mixed group of alien students. The music, as the Mallory described it, was entirely different. A harmony rather than percussion, with each participant contributing to a complex composition rather than attempting to dominate it. "They are learning to play together," Shimmer of Distant Stars reported to Professor Kithrak. "But the humans are not learning alien techniques. The aliens are learning human ones. And the difference? Human techniques assume that everything is trying to kill you, including your training partners, your equipment, and possibly the ground you are standing on. Once you accept this premise, everything else becomes remarkably simple." Professor Kithrak watched through the observation window as a Zephyrian successfully executed what the humans called a dirty move, an attack that violated every principle of civilized combat, but would be highly effective in actual warfare. "Fascinating," he murmured. "They really had no idea what they were studying." The Academy's official records would show that the Human Combat Psychology program had successfully integrated human military philosophy with existing consortium training protocols. Unofficial observations suggested that what had actually happened was the systematic corruption of 47 different species approaches to conflict resolution, with the enthusiastic cooperation of the species being corrupted. And in the hydroponics garden, Senior Cadet Dust continued tending tomatoes with the same methodical care that had characterized everything else, occasionally pausing to answer questions from beings who were slowly learning that the universe was a significantly more dangerous place than their evolutionary history had prepared them to understand. The machines, as always, continued following their programming. They had, however, updated their threat assessment algorithms to account for the growing number of non-humans who had begun exhibiting distinctly human approaches to problem-solving, which suggested that even the machines were learning something from this arrangement, though what exactly they were learning remained an open question.